Well, thank you so much, Brian. I'm joined by Luis Scott-Vargas now. Usually when we're standing here, we're talking about a single deck. We're going to do something a little different this time around. It's kind of a deck mashup, so we can really highlight the differences between Grixis Control and Blue-Black Control, specifically Josh Utter-Layton's list and Shota Yasaoka's list. But they really all revolve around one card. There it is, Search for Azcanta. When you saw this, Luis, did you know how potentially broken this card could be?
It certainly looked like a powerful card. How powerful it ended up being, it was not immediately apparent.
Sure. So why is this card so important to add to these decks?
So first of all, when you play this, it starts giving you a little bit of card selection. At the beginning of upkeep, you get to decide whether you want to keep your top card, and if it's bad, you don't even have to draw it. But where it really shines is when it flips into Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, and all of a sudden you've got an extra land, which control decks could always use, and a land that provides card advantage. You start using it to dig up non-creature spells like Disallow, Vraska's Contempt, Fatal Push.
So each of these decks has 3 Search for Azcanta in, and then that's what we mean by cards in common. All right, let's look at more cards that these 2 decks have in common. There you see 3 copies of Disallow, 2 Essence Scatter, 1 Glimmer of Genius, they at least each have, and 2 Torrential Gearhulk. And these are obviously just highlight cards from both of these decks.
Yeah, it's really hard to get away from Disallow and Essence Scatter, and both decks are choosing to use a lot of these counter spells. And as for card advantage, we're actually seeing fewer copies of Glimmer of Genius and Torrential Gearhulk than we used to. There's used to be just almost a mandatory 4 of in these decks, but Search for Azcanta really goes a long way.
So here's our next slide, which could give us a clue as to why we're seeing fewer Torrential Gearhulk. There he is, Scarab God, at least 1 in common between these lists, 4 copies of Fatal Push still, and 2 Vraska's Contempt.
Yeah, Shota runs a little light on Scarab God, because, you know, as we'll see later, he's got Nicole Bolas, but the Blue-Black Control deck runs the full 3 copies, and the Scarab God is proving to be one of the most dominant cards in Standard among all sorts of decks, not even just this one. Fatal Push and Vraska's Contempt both give you just very good answers to early aggression, and even in the mid-game, Vraska's Contempt shines.
A look at the lands between these 2 decks that they share in common. Here we go, Drowned Catacomb, Fetid Pools, Evolving Wilds, and 1 Field of Ruin. So that will become kind of more apparent as we work our way through the list, how the mana base is kind of stretched a little bit more in Grixis Control. So let's take a look at the basics that these decks share. 3 islands, 2 swamp, there it is. Of course, you're not gonna see any mountains here for the decks in common. Let's take a look at Blue-Black's unique cards. So, 4 Censor, that is kind of one of the highlights here.
And Censor kind of occupies the slot of both early interaction and slight card filtering. Gets you an extra card in your graveyard so you can flip your search just like a turn earlier. And Censor is really important. And you can see by the copy of the 4th Disallow and the 3rd and 4th Essence Scatter, Blue-Black just maxes out on all the counter spells. They're just not messing around, all the counters all the time. And 4 copies of Hieroglyphic Illumination, another card you can cycle early to fill up your graveyard, you can cast it later, and it's a very good Torrential Gearhulk target. Yeah,
we have 1 more additional copy, as you said, of Torrential Gearhulk in Blue-Black Control as well. Let's take a look at some more unique cards from Blue-Black Control. Here we go, 2 Essence Extraction, there's the extra Scarab God, and the extra Vraska's Contempt. So tell me about these.
So you'll notice that the Blue-Black deck just has more copies of all of its cards, and that's because it's restricted to 2 colors. It doesn't have the option of playing a lot of the cards we're going to see the Grixis deck plays, and the deck's actually just a little bit more focused. Shota likes to play 1 of, so we're going to see a lot more cards.
And these Essence Extractions are unique to this list as well?
Shota has some in the sideboard, but yes, the Blue-Black deck has 2 in the main deck, more in the sideboard, and wants to just use them to catch up any ground it has lost against Ramanop Red.
And let's take a look at the lands. Here's where we see 2 extra copies of Field of Ruin here. So this is pretty important if you're ever facing the Mirror or anybody else who's running Search for Azcanta.
I actually believe the fact that the Blue-Black can play up to 3, maybe even 4 copies of Field of Ruin is going to kind of push Grixis out of the metagame. It's just so valuable and so important to be able to kill opposing Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, that it's really hard to imagine that, well, Field of Ruin is not something that you want to leave behind.
All right, let's take a look at some of the unique cards that we're going to see in Grixis Control here. There you see it, 4 Opt instead of the Censor. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
Opt's a little bit more powerful when you spend a single blue mana. Censor just replaces itself. Opt gives you a little card selection on the way, so it smooths out your first couple turns. The disadvantage is it's not something actually relevant in your first couple turns in terms of interaction, whereas Censor can stop opposing 2 drops, 3 drops, even 4 drops without much trouble.
And this deck also able to run 2 more Glimmer of Genius, and here it is, Supreme Will. We didn't see it in the previous list.
Shota uses a different version of card selection, more glimmers, more supreme wills, and no hieroglyphic illuminations.
All right, let's take a look at some cards that could only exist in Shota's list. Well, we could see Bantu's Last Reckoning. We certainly could not see Hour of Devastation, nor Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh.
Yeah, Shota dips into red for some of these powerful sweepers and finishers in the God Pharaoh. And then Bantu's Last Reckoning, a card that some of the blue-black decks do employ. We saw Kevin Chu use it very effectively against William Jensen.
How good is Hour of Devastation here?
It's quite effective at sweeping up planeswalkers as well as creatures that can wipe out a Bristling Hydra and a Chandra in one fell swoop.
More removal yet for Grixis control. Let's take a look. We've got a Braid, Harness Lightning, Unlicensed Disintegration. How important is it to have access to these spells that you obviously just don't get in blue-black control?
It adds a little bit more cheap removal. Instead of the 4-mana Vraska's Contempt, you have some more 2-mana options. You're better at killing Long Tusk Cubs early, and that is important.
All right, and let's take a look at the lands that are unique to Grixis control. Obviously, you're stretching your mana base more. How much of a disadvantage is that in the end?
I think it does add up. Over the course of a tournament, I think you're going to lose maybe 1 or 2 extra games with Grixis as a result of not having enough of one of your 3 colors of mana.
All right, so Luis, overall thoughts, blue-black control versus Grixis control. They're put in a ring, they're fighting. Who do you pick?
Oh, blue-black just murders Grixis.
All right, thank you so much, Luis.
No
Scott
problem.
Vargas. More Magic after these messages.